Headlines for this week of February 19th. Media lies. Journalist returns from Syria, exposing what she saw, including corrupt humanitarian groups. The heart of Russia. New Foreign Ministry spokesperson addresses criticisms and shares a desire from her heart that may surprise many. Financial shift. We know the old is collapsing, but BRICS continues to build a new paradigm. And creating Tomorrowland. Weathering the current changes and being an agent for positive global change requires some hard choices now.
With news around, upon, within, and beyond our planet, the program making disclosure official. This is Cosmic Vision News. Here is Jeffrey West.
Greetings and blessings to all. There are all kinds of arguments that could be made about the truthfulness and integrity of journalists for any media. In most cases, however, these arguments are generally directed towards the mainstream Western media, and in some cases directed towards the media establishments of various other countries, including Russia. It is hard to always discern who is giving out the most accurate information. I remind listeners that truth is a very subjective term, as truth is only that information which is relevant to any individual accepting that information as truth in any current moment of now. CVN has always encouraged listeners to never accept anything reported on this newscast as truth, but to merely use the information that feels meaningful to begin a deeper exploration on one's own to determine what is truth for that individual. As one practices listening to information from a more heart-centered space, one may begin to feel or sense what information is more accurate compared to other information. This week, we start by looking at a couple of perspectives. With information regarding Syria and the Middle East, a Canadian journalist, Eva Bartlett, has recently returned from a trip overseas. Bartlett has spent a number of years living within some of the conflict zones, such as Gaza and Syria. On a recent interview on The Richie Allen Show, around February the 11th, Bartlett shares important information regarding what the mainstream Western media is trying to sell to the world. Bartlett starts out by first responding to Allen's question about why she was over there.
I was there to go in solidarity with the Syrian people and also to witness with your own eyes and to hear what the Syrian people there have to say as opposed to what the corporate narrative on Syria is. Because, as you know, the corporate media totally ignores the will of the Syrian people and they take representatives from exile or Saudi-backed representatives as word of the Syrian people. So when I've gone there, I've been able to visit certain key areas in Syria and actually just talk with the people and ask, what do they believe is going on? What do they want? And their answers are very clear, as simple as you would imagine. They understand that what is happening in Syria is a foreign war on Syria designed to topple their government and serve certain agendas in certain neighboring countries like so-called Israel. And they also adamantly support their president, their government, and they support their Syrian army, the Syrian Arab army. And these are all narratives that you wouldn't hear in the corporate media. So if you go there and you talk with people, you hear those narratives and also you see the devastation, the terrorism they've been exposed to, whether it's car bombings, which I've gone to different neighborhoods that have been exposed to car bombings, terrorist car bombings, or whether it's the terrorist mortars and rockets that rain down on various areas of Damascus, of Aleppo, of countries all over Syria. Wherever there are terrorist hotbeds, they send dirty mortars and hell cannons onto civilian areas in a way to punish them for whatever reason, for their support of the government or for simply not taking their side in this foreign war on Syria. So my main objective has been to bear witness and foremost to transmit what Syrians tell me, what they want the world outside of Syria to actually know and hear.
Let's talk about some of the big claims made after let's be honest about it, the CIA, MI6, Mossad-sponsored fake revolution in Syria in 2011. We were told very early on, of course, that rather than go after those who were opposing him and his government, that Assad's army started indiscriminately attacking civilians in various cities in Syria. We then heard the chemical weapons story. We then heard that he was barrel bombing his own people. It must be said again that those accusing him of these crimes never provided a shred of evidence. Even being a real journalist, you weren't looking for evidence that Assad was indiscriminately murdering anybody whom he thought was against him in Syria. What's the real story?
I'm not an analyst, but what I do is look at actual journalists and analysts who've done a good job of documenting. And there's a number of people that have done a good job of documenting and refuting these lies. But with respect to the initial lies of so-called unarmed protest and, the Syrian forces apparently, allegedly, gunning down unarmed protesters, that's patently false, and that's been documented and refuted time and again, whether it's articles like Professor Tim Anderson's, many articles on the initial protests and this fake revolution, or Sharmeen Narwani's articles on different massacres that occurred at the hands of these terrorists that at that time were not labeled at whatever so-called moderate terrorist sect that they are now. These massacres of Syrian security forces, these are all documented. And then you talk with people who are from Syria and live in the areas that were purportedly coming under governmental fire, and whether it's Homs or Latakia, you get a different narrative. And I've had many Syrian tell me, they watched Al Jazeera, and Al Jazeera would be reporting that the Syrian government, the army, was supposedly massacring people, and the people in that area would say to their relatives, for example, a friend in Toronto talked with her relative in Homs, and she said, I'm watching Al Jazeera, but this is not happening. This is false. Wow. And this has happened time and time again. I talked with a friend that's living in Latakia, and she said the same thing. She cited an LA Times report. I don't remember what year or date, but she said essentially they were alleging all these things were happening in Latakia. And she said she was out in Latakia that day. She went to pretty much all the places that this report cited. The reporter, of course, being based in Beirut or LA, and none of the things that were being alleged were happening. And then throughout the last 5 years, you've had ridiculous assertion after ridiculous assertion, which have again been refuted, whether it's chemical weapons, which finally was proven to have come from the terrorists that the West likes to call moderate rebels, or the massacres in Latakia. When they happened, most of the corporate media, BBC, corporate media, Al Jazeera, would blame the Syrian government. But then with some investigation, they found out, no, in fact, it could only have happened by the terrorists that they like to call rebels. And they had, numerous people who were willing to testify to that. But when you take the chemical weapons allegations, which were false, they relied on photographs, for example, of children that were abducted, most likely from the outskirts of Latakia, by the terrorists, and they were actually staged. Whether the children were drugged or dead, we don't know. They were actually staged in different areas and purported to have been gassed by the Syrian army. And some of the investigations that looked into these allegations found, well, child A is found in 2 different locations. How is this possible?
How is it possible,
How is it possible unless the child has been used?
What about the size and the capability of the so-called Daesh or ISIS or ISIL or whatever people are calling them today? What sort of sense of that did you get a few weeks ago in Syria? How big are these guys?
I think that's not really possible to know how big they are because the borders of Turkey and Iraq and Jordan and occupied Palestine, otherwise known as so-called Israel, the terrorists come in and out through those borders, and this has been documented. So it's hard to know because the West and their Saudi allies are continually resupplying, replenishing terrorists. So-called Israel treats the terrorists and then sends them back into Syria. I think what we could look to instead is the positive developments in recent weeks and months, largely due thanks to the support, the welcome support by the Syrian government of the Russian Air Force, bombing terrorist locations as the NATO alliance did not do, which has enabled the Syrian Arab army and their allies to make a lot of headway, particularly in the Aleppo region, liberating, for example, the long, 3.5 years besieged towns of Nubal and Zahra, which again, if we're going to talk about media and what they prioritized, the media never talked about Nubal and Zahra because it didn't serve the war agenda. But these towns have been liberated, and many other towns in the Aleppo countryside have been liberated, and strategic supply lines have been cut off. So in terms of numbers of terrorists, they're fleeing. The media is reporting tens of thousands of civilians fleeing to Turkey, fleeing Russian bombing. This is lies. These are terrorists fleeing amongst civilians, perhaps, but largely a huge number of terrorists because they've given up the fight. They can't take on the Syrian army and allies because they are no longer being supplied. But in terms of what I saw on the ground, when I was in a district of Homs called Al-War, it's one of the remaining areas, it's the only remaining area, to my knowledge, that still has some terrorists in it. But there are still over 2,000 terrorists in Al-War. One thing I just wanted to highlight with this, just in brief, the media lies and Madaya are saying the Syrian government and army are starving civilians, and this is patently false. It's the terrorists who are starving civilians. But with Al-Wa'ir, an area that is occupied by terrorists, the government is enabling and sending in food and medical aid. Not only are food and medical supplies being sent in, but the government is supplying the electricity and water. So they have not cut off the basics of life, even though the terrorists are there. This totally contradicts what the corporate media would have us believe on the government and the army starving people.
Yeah, it's the same script they used when talking about Gaddafi and when talking about Saddam Hussein and others. You're absolutely right. Only last week, countries convened in London under the chairmanship of David Cameron to talk about raising money to send aid to Syria. Absolutely incredible that it's not laughed out of town by the British media. You know, we want to raise millions to bomb the bejesus out of certain parts of Syria. Now let's raise a load of money to aid the Syrian people. It's crazy. But Sean asks this, and it's a good question. Do you think this Western campaign to support the Syrian people with aid might be a covert way of getting more ammunition and more supplies to Daesh?
Some of my colleagues have done a lot of excellent research into various human rights groups that are posing as human rights groups, but are really front groups supporting terrorists. I made a list. I'm just mentioning this so that we can refer to players that are posing as human rights groups and aid groups. Whatever aid, you'd have to be wary, like, how is that aid going to enter Syria? Is it going to enter via Turkey? And if so, it's a given that it's going to be supporting terrorists, because that's what Turkey does. If it enters through the Syrian government, okay, well, maybe it truly is aid. But I would be skeptical that these Western nations that are actively trying to destabilize Syria and overthrow the elected government would actually be sending aid via the government. That kind of beggars belief. So I think that your listener has a good point that the West, or the UK residents in this case, are being duped twice over, by first believing that the UK wants to fight terrorism in Syria when it's actively supporting terrorism in Syria, and then twice by scamming UK residents of money so that they can perhaps arm more terrorists in Syria.
But the Russian intervention, of course, has put a big halt to the gallop of the Western plans for Syria. You will, of course, know, Eva, I've been talking about it on this programme, that in recent days the anti-Russian propaganda has been ramped up to new levels. We're being told that the Russians are killing people whom they know to be moderate and not to be ISIS, which is basically accusing Russia of war crimes. To make matters worse, the planes are hanging around, and when people are coming to aid the injured, the Russians are firing on them as well. There's been no proof offered, documentary evidence, there's been no videos, no photographs, nothing. They're just telling us Russia are evil, they're doing this, and they're causing all these problems. How serious is this going to get, do you think?
Well, I remember a back and forth at the State Department, and the really inarticulate State Department spokeswoman was accusing Russia of having bombed hospitals in the Aleppo area.
Yeah.
And a number of journalists, an RT journalist, and then Matthew Lee, who's a remarkable journalist that covers different things at the UN and State Department, were saying, okay, we'll provide the coordinates. And they couldn't, of course. In contrast, Russian intelligence and satellite imagery could provide coordinates of the alleged hospitals bombed and show that they were intact. This is a prior example, but why, I think the question people, if they really want to understand, they have to ask themselves, why would the West be escalating this campaign against Russia right now? Why would they be claiming these things? Two reasons. One, because Russia, under the invitation of the Syrian government, has been targeting terrorists and supporting the Syrian army advances. And two, because of these advances, this is making it less and less possible for the West to maintain their narrative, because as soon as an area is liberated, and Western media doesn't go there, but media that goes there talks to the people that say, thank God the Syrian army came, thank God for Russia, because now we're free, these terrorists have been terrorizing us. There's going to be a demonization campaign against Russia because they're doing exactly what the international coalition said they were going to do, but obviously had no intent to do. And actually, just on a personal note, a friend, he's Syrian, he lived in Canada for a bit, he's in Aleppo, and he sent a message saying, President Assad is not exterminating his people, I'm still alive, I've not had a problem here, if anything happens to me, it's going to be through the terrorists, essentially is what he's saying, I'm paraphrasing. The UN is lying about the reports on Aleppo and Syria in general. He's in Aleppo, so I would take his word over unnamed activists or the various uncredible so-called human rights groups that the corporate media likes to rely on, whether they're, the UK one-man show SOHR or whether they're Ken Roth of Human Rights Watch. And, just on a note of all these different lying, scheming, warmongering human rights front groups, I have a link on my blog, also on the SyriaSolidarityMovement.org blog, and I just simply called it Human Rights Front Groups Warring on Syria. And it lists the players from Avaz to Human Rights Watch to Médecins Sans Frontières to the various less known ones that really play in heartstrings, like the Syria campaign or the White Helmets, which my colleague Vanessa Beeley has done a lot of excellent investigation into. So, getting back to the whole anti-Russia campaign, there is no proof. There are no stats. In fact, when you ask Syrians inside Syria, or you look at some of the wonderful Syrian reporting, and there's a lot of excellent English reporting by Syrian and Lebanese journalists in Syria, and you will find that these are completely baseless accusations.
Some listeners may recall the recent stories, but also other stories in the past of alleged Russian attacks on civilian targets, such as hospitals. Over the last couple of weeks, the Western media has again been attempting to sell this narrative regarding alleged acts of Russian aggression. Bartlett, as mentioned in her interview, has created a web page outlining what she believes are corrupted humanitarian interests that have been acting within various countries where Western interventions have been occurring. Bartlett named several, but her web page mentions the following by name, and even for me, there were a few huge surprises. Here are the groups Bartlett is calling out: Avaz, Amnesty International, Hand in Hand for Syria, Human Rights Watch, Ken Roth, Médecins Sans Frontières, also known as Doctors Without Borders, Physicians for Human Rights, Purpose Incorporated, the Syrian Campaign, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, and also White Helmets. Links will be in the show summary detailing her research on each of the groups that she has named. In light of the Western attempts to blame Russia for alleged attacks on a recent Doctors Without Borders clinic, it may be of particular interest to note that Bartlett's research suggests that this group is not working for a truly stated humanitarian purpose in the country. RT reported on February 19th that Doctors Without Borders has now admitted that it does not provide GPS coordinates of health facilities it supports in Syria to either Damascus or Moscow over fears of, quote-unquote, deliberate attacks, the medical charity has said, blaming a recent strike on probably Syrian or Russian forces. Yet, as you will hear in this next story, the Russians and some journalists have been demanding from Western officials the coordinates of facilities alleged to have been attacked, only to be met with silence. In other geopolitical news, you heard moments ago Eva Bartlett speaking from a Western alternative news perspective of what's going on in Syria and the Middle East. Recently, Maria Zakharova, the spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry, appeared on RT's program In the Now with Anasa Narawai. Zakharova was appointed to the position early last August. An RT article announcing her appointment at that time wrote the following: Russia's Foreign Ministry appointed a new director for its Information and Press Department. Maria Zakharova is the first woman to become the ministry's spokesperson. Zakharova, who has worked in the ministry since 1998, began her career as an editor, serving as head of Russia's Permanent Missions Press Service at the United Nations in New York for several years before being appointed as a deputy director in the Information and Press Department. She holds the diplomatic rank of Minister Counselor and is also a popular blogger. She is a fluent speaker of English and Chinese. Zakharova is a well-known blogger and offers perspectives as an expert and not as official statements from the ministry. Her experienced use of social media has enhanced the affairs of the department, and one article from the Russia Behind the Scenes news website labeled her as a breath of fresh air. She brings a distinctly human and strong feminine perspective to her role, as I think you will hear in the following interview. In the following excerpts, pay particular attention to how she starts the interview, and I know that many listeners will be intrigued by this. Note particularly as well the end of the audio clip as she describes how Russians generally react to war and how she herself reacts.
Syria, the migrant crisis, the rise of far-right sentiment in Europe, things right now don't look so good on the continent. Why has this become possible?
Generally speaking, I think maybe the Maya were right with their calendar after all. The seismic shifts we observe today in international relations and the world situation in general are not limited to one region or one continent. It is a global change, a redistribution of forces, a shift in the balance of power worldwide. At least everything points in this direction. It all started with certain countries, and we all know what those countries are. We can openly name those countries now. It all started when they decided to revise the fundamental principles of international relations and interaction between nations. They sought to downplay and completely destroy such principles as mutual respect between nations, territorial integrity, and respect of other countries' sovereignty, non-interference in other countries' affairs. These are the fundamental principles enshrined in the UN Charter, which used to guarantee the peaceful coexistence of nations, and they are in jeopardy today. So the things happening today, like the situation with migrants, or to call a spade, refugees, we're basically witnessing an exodus from the Middle East. The situation in the Middle East and the upsurge in terrorism, these are all harbingers of things to come, showing us that without a proper system of international law, this is what the world may eventually come to. Of course, I don't mean to sound ominous, but these are just the early signs of things to come.
The U.S. is very open about Russia being one of the major threats to it in the world. Just take a listen to this.
Standing up to Russian aggression.
Russia presents the greatest threat to our national security.
Considered Russia the #1 threat to the United States.
So the U.S. doesn't hide that it believes Russia is an enemy. Maybe some diplomats slightly.
No, this is not the way it is. You're saying the U.S. makes no secret of the fact that Russia is the biggest threat, and so on and so forth. I strongly disagree with this. To make no secret of something means you honestly believe this. You have all the facts, and eventually you start telling the world the truth. Our situation is totally different. They certainly know that we pose no threat. They certainly have no facts to show that we pose some kind of threat. They just want to create an impression that they perceive Russia as a threat. This is something totally different. If the United States had at least some facts, if they had at least something, they would have presented it to the world a long time ago. But they have no facts. They have nothing that would look at least remotely like facts. All we've seen so far is a typical propaganda campaign, which makes use of all the tools available to them. Government agencies, prominent newsmakers, major media organizations. They all form a kind of a holding company, a propaganda conglomerate. In fact, they went further. A local campaign is not enough for them. They want to go global. This is why they do the things they do, say the things they say.
At one point, Zakharova was asked about the media propaganda that was done not only by Western journalists, but also by Russian journalists. She was asked to comment on whether Russian journalists are instructed to toe any particular media or government agenda line, and the rest of the interview continues after that.
You know, propaganda always involves both the government and the media.
Okay, so where is Kisilyov and some of the propaganda and the very strong statements we're hearing in the Russian media coming from, if it's not a tone they're taking from the government?
First of all, you have to ask Kisilyov about this. He doesn't take orders from me when making his show. In fact, we understand the concerns of our counterparts in the US and other countries who sent official requests to us, asking us to influence Kisilyov and others. We tell them that we have a free media, and we don't share their extreme views. We always stress this in our media events. But there's nothing we can do if some people in Russia listen to Mr. Breedlove or Mr. McCain or other US government officials, and the things they say evoke such a belligerent response in some of the Russian people. This is their reaction to the things they hear. You may remember that there was a period, 10 or 15, or perhaps even close to 20 years, during which we would listen to everything the West had to say, with our eyes and ears wide open, and we did our best to cooperate with our Western partners. In fact, we're still trying to cooperate with them. But when Mr. McCain starts talking about Russia the way he does, and Western media outlets make films about Russia launching nuclear strikes against Europe, and NATO officials like Stoltenberg or his predecessor announce that they are going to boost their defense spending to contain Russia, what kind of reaction do you expect from some of the people of Russia? Unfortunately, this comes as a response to the things we hear from the West.
You suggested that there's no kind of evidence or proof that you could directly affect the media and what they do, their tone. Are you suggesting that there is this kind of connection between the State Department and the media we see on CNN and BBC? Is there a direct, so to say, push from the government in the U.S. media?
We know that the media tends to focus on what you might call bad news. Few journalists are interested in covering only positive news. The media is mostly interested in terrorist attacks and humanitarian disasters. And there's nothing wrong with that, because that's where people are suffering, and that's what the media should focus on. But sometimes the media employs double standards. Sometimes, for example, the media sees the humanitarian crisis in Aleppo, but ignores the humanitarian crisis in southeastern Ukraine. This can only mean one of two things. Either you are incompetent as a journalist, or there's someone behind you pulling the strings. There's no other option. I'm well familiar with the professional level of U.S. journalists. I've worked with them in New York and in Moscow, and I can't imagine that they can be so incompetent. It's just impossible not to notice the things they ignore.
So you're saying they're consciously deciding not to tell, let's say, both sides in Ukraine?
As far as Ukraine is concerned, I can offer you an example. You asked, what about the Russian media? I can tell you that Russian media outlets work both in Kiev and in southeastern Ukraine. The only problem is they're not allowed to work in Kiev. That's the difference between the way the Russian media works. And I'm not saying that its position on Ukraine is totally unbiased. No, you may be an extremely professional journalist, but there will always be something personal in what you write. But Russian journalists provide their audience with information both from Kiev and from the southeast. How many Western media outlets work in southeastern Ukraine? I can hardly remember any.
No, of course, but I think it's horrible. It's a mistake, and two wrongs don't make a right.
But this is not a mistake. A mistake is something you do unintentionally, but I think they know what they're doing. It's impossible not to notice what is going on. It's impossible not to notice those people who were burned alive in Odessa. I'd like to say one more thing concerning Syria. Do you think the international community and global media outlets hadn't heard about the humanitarian crisis in Syria until recently? Do you think that for 4.5 years they didn't realize that Syrian children were suffering because of the internal conflict and war that is raging there? They didn't say a word about it. Instead, they've been shipping arms, sending money, and financing the so-called moderate opposition, which was supposed to topple Assad. Nobody ever thought about the children. I believe that a Syrian boy or girl in 2014 is no different from a Syrian boy or girl in 2015. They are the same children. The only difference is that back then, the media didn't care to talk about them, and now they do.
Just a couple of weeks ago, you suggested that it could be suitable to prop up armed opposition against ISIS, which of course Russia is doing, but that the U.S. should not do the same because their purpose is different. Could you expand on that for us?
The problem is that for about 2 years now, the Americans who led the coalition have been saying that they're fighting terrorists. Yet they continued to support certain groups within the Syrian opposition that they considered moderates. During the whole time, we, not just Russia, but the whole world, couldn't understand their strategy. The number of terrorists kept growing, as did their supply of arms and money. All these factors led us to ask a question. What exactly are you doing in the region if all your stated objectives have not been met and all your actions have in fact had an opposite effect? So it's difficult to understand the U.S. strategy there, unless we admit that their intention is to destabilize the region as a whole. There are no other logical explanations.
you were talking about how to many global citizens, the war in Syria, it's not clear. It's about Russia bombing and this person bombing, and they don't really know the details. This is what viewers of mainstream media are hearing about Russia and its bombing campaign. Take a listen.
200 civilians have been killed in Russian airstrikes in Syria.
Indiscriminately bombing a civilian area.
Russian jets are responsible for the strikes.
Dozens of civilian casualties.
Killed countless civilians.
How do you react to these accusations?
It's the same issue. Who is communicating this kind of message? Western officials say that. The State Department, Foreign Office, French Foreign Ministry, etc. If you're an official representative of your state agencies, please give us official information that would confirm that these intentional mass killings of civilians and destruction of infrastructure took place. During this whole time, we haven't received any official data from them. No images, no numbers, nothing. There's one figure: 70–80% of Russian airstrikes hit civilian targets. They openly say that, but when we ask for proof, there's nothing. Their technical capabilities are very advanced, and yet they fail to produce satellite images and so forth. It means that they don't really have them. So it's all part of a propaganda drive that eventually makes its way into the media.
Let's end on a lighter note. Tell us something that you think people in the West, so to say, don't know about you. They see you as the face of the foreign ministry. What is the most surprising thing about Maria Zakharova?
I don't really want to talk about myself. You can find out about me in social media, complete with photos, so anyone can see for themselves and draw their own conclusions. I can tell you this. There's a Soviet-era song that I believe to be more relevant today than ever before. It's titled, "Do the Russians Want War?" I think this is something the West does not understand about us. There are many issues where they can afford not to understand what we're trying to say, but they need to understand this. Even for modern-day Russians, who grew up at a peaceful time and didn't witness World War II, even though we did witness the war in Chechnya and we've had to face the threat of international terrorism, there's no prospect more terrifying than war. That's the way I was brought up, and that may be the biggest secret about me. My grandma used to tell me, remember, there's nothing more horrible than war. Every time I'd come to complain about something, she'd tell me, that's nothing, you can fix anything. You can redo things and correct even the most disastrous of your mistakes. But remember, there's nothing worse in this world than war. Because war renders everything else irrelevant. When there is war, there's neither good nor bad. There's only war. So when they make mockumentaries in the West about Russia mounting offensive and launching missile strikes, there's one thing they fail to understand. The mere mention of war to a Russian makes our skin crawl. It gives us a sense of the world coming to an end, a sense of panic. Once they realize that, if they ever do, they'll be able to understand everything about us. We have lived through real war so many times, not the movies or video games, the way they get to experience it. It's not even the kind of war where they dispatch their troops elsewhere, not knowing what it's like to fight a war at home. If they ever realize that, which I hope they will, they are bound to feel guilty and ashamed of what they're doing right now.
Maria Zakharova, tears in her eyes, just so you know. Thank you so much for being in the now.
For those who are good at seeing the feelings of others in their eyes, they may be able to see or perhaps feel the sadness as she speaks of war. As Narowai noted, Zakharova had tears in her eyes at the end of the interview. It is, no doubt, a perspective that many will not be used to seeing or hearing from an official ministry spokesperson from Russia. This, however, is part of the changing times we are in, and change is affecting everyone and everything. Western people have been accustomed to judging other nations and their leaders based on what has been told to us, and yet we are now discovering that most, if not all, of what has been told to people in the West is either a lie, or it is intended to cover up a lie, or something else. As Zakharova noted, it is her wish that people would make a real attempt to begin to understand what is truly in the hearts of Russians before passing judgments based on information from sources whose interests are to ensure that people do not truly understand the Russian psychology. From this interview, although there were some comments that gave the impression the world was going in a negative direction, the feeling I sense from her is that she is at least aware, if not very aware, of the unfolding shift in human and planetary consciousness at this time. The link to the interview will appear in the show summary for this story. Over to Ukraine now, and although it still appears to be a bit unclear, there may be a few signs to suggest that at least some officials in that country may be awakening to what has been really going on in their country. At the moment, however, it is unclear as to who is on the side of the EU and the US and who is on the side of Ukraine herself. At the time of the Maidan massacre in the capital city of Kiev in early 2014, the news broke of 2 voice recordings, both of which were aired on CVN at that time. The mainstream Western media ignored both recordings. One conversation was between the Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs at the U.S. Department of State, Victoria Nuland, and U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Pyatt. Nuland has long been identified as being a point person for the global cabal in whatever countries the U.S. has been interfering with. In that conversation, Nuland was discussing who should be allowed to lead the country, and it was in this recording that Nuland gave her now famous "fuck the EU" comment. A second recording that was confirmed by the Estonian Foreign Ministry was between the High Representative for the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Catherine Ashton, and the Minister for Foreign Affairs in Estonia at that time, Urmas Paet. In this conversation, facts were revealed indicating that snipers were present in Maidan Square, and snipers were targeting both civilians and police officers in order to stir up a false flag controversy. The snipers were apparently hired by the organizers of the Maidan event and are reported to have connections to both the U.S. and Israel. After that revolution, Arseniy Yatsenyuk was installed as Prime Minister in a coalition government with the political party of Petro Poroshenko, President Petro Poroshenko, both of whom are believed to be puppets to Victoria Nuland and to the U.S. in general. For years, the Ukrainian people have been fed promises that they would become part of the EU and that they would get visa-free travel around the EU. 2 years later, the country is still suffering from EU and Western bailout loans that have not helped the people at all, but instead gone to pay off officials and bankers. The taxpayers are struggling to pay off the fraudulent bank loans, which they never agreed to nor benefited from. The destabilization was blamed on Russia for numerous reasons that have been discussed by CVN previously, while the U.S. maintains its pattern of destroying countries that it seeks to get control of in order to preserve and protect its now rapidly disintegrating hegemony in geopolitics. Several recent articles appearing on Germany's Deutsche Welle news website are apparently beginning to hint at cracks forming within the governing coalition. On February 16th, one DW article reported that President Poroshenko had apparently asked the Prime Minister Yatsenyuk to resign. Again, at this time, it is unclear to know who is acting in which capacity and why. A second article reported that a vote of non-confidence had taken place within the Ukraine parliament and somehow Yatsenyuk had survived. Poroshenko's party is the largest party, apparently, in the coalition, and this suggests a rift is forming about what is truly best for the country. On December 17th, DW reported that the Fatherland Party, led by Yulia Tymoshenko, has announced that it is breaking from the coalition and is encouraging other parties to do so also. This is a bit confusing. Tymoshenko, a former prime minister, was once a strong supporter of the U.S., and she was recognized as a co-leader of the Orange Color Revolution in 2005. She was later jailed by those in government who had a strong connection with Russia. After the U.S. installed its puppet government, Tymoshenko was apparently released and resumed her leadership of the Fatherland Party. Now, supposedly with a U.S.-controlled government in place, Tymoshenko is now announcing a break from this coalition. So it is unclear if she sees the U.S. involvement in the destruction of her country or is acting out of other interests. Another strong hint of a forming rift took place on February the 3rd when Deutsche Welle reported that Ukraine's economy minister quit over reform obstruction. Economy Minister Aivaras Abramovicius has accused parts of the Ukrainian leadership of blocking systemic reforms in the country. My team and I have no wish to be a cover for open corruption. Abramovicius is one of 4 foreign puppets that the U.S. lobbied to have placed within the Ukraine government, and they were never elected by the people. This resignation could be taken in one of 2 ways. The first is that it is a staged event by Abramovicius and the U.S. as a way of inciting some other agenda within the country. Or 2, Abramovicius has seen the error of his ways and is seeking to get himself out of the corruption and damage that has been done by foreign interests in Ukraine. As Maria Zakharova said moments ago, events are impacting all countries and all continents, and I might also add that it is occurring on all levels also. More news can be expected out of Ukraine as these developments continue. Listeners may be wondering if there are any updates to the story of the Mohawk Initiative this week. I have been informed that there were meetings scheduled all day Friday, February 19th. As of airtime, I have not been contacted with any updates, so I can only assume that the meetings are ongoing. What we know so far is this. The legal letters have been sent out to the various government and corporate entities regarding the land claim by the Grand River Mohawks, and also the letters of historical and current debts owed by the British monarchy, the Canadian government, and numerous commercial entities that benefited from a Six Nations Trust Fund without the informed consent of the Mohawks and the groups within the Six Nations. Those who have listened to the last 2 or 3 newscasts will have an idea of how potentially significant the Mohawk Initiative will be, not only in Canada, but also for Indigenous groups worldwide and humanity in general. Those entities that received their letters should have submitted by today, February 19th, their intention to cooperate with the Grand River Mohawks in resolving their debts or be faced with possible further legal actions. Several letters were delivered a few days later, so it will be sometime next week before we will hear if the Canadian government, for example, plans to finally acknowledge the Grand River Mohawks and especially address their accumulated debts as well. CVN expects to have more information on this major developing story as the Grand River Mohawks continue their initiative to not only expose the global cabal, but reclaim lands that were never surrendered, while empowering groups around the world to use their lands in honorable service to the planet by concerned humans seeking to live under the great tree of peace. More news is expected next week. In financial news, I'm going to take a bit of a break this week from reporting on people and stories saying that the financial markets are imploding or collapsing or whatever. Listeners already know that this is happening, and there are only so many ways to say the same thing over and over. Most of these sources will also only focus on the implosion or the collapse without offering any positive information about the shifting of the geoeconomic paradigm being brought about by China, Russia, the BRICS alliance, and other allies. Without focusing this week on news about the global stock markets or the price of oil, we start by looking at some news from the BRICS alliance. Western media has been attempting to sell the narrative that China's economy is collapsing and that China is responsible for what is now happening globally. There is some truth in this statement, depending on the perspective, as I have noted recently on this newscast. From the global perspective, China is responsible for the collapse of their system of greed and debt, so the Western media and oligarchs are trying to scare people into blaming China while doing more to prop up the Western economies through fearful spending and consumerism, to push the cabal agenda of negative interest rates from various central banks. However, what China and other countries, including Russia, are doing is beginning their takedown of the global banking cabal and also those aligned with the global military-industrial cabal and their partners. They are implementing their own international banking structures that will allow countries to do business without using the US dollar as a median currency for exchange between countries. We are beginning to witness numerous countries beginning to set up trade deals that exclude the involvement of the US dollar, and it is believed that this has begun to severely impact the funds that the cabal has traditionally used to pay for its criminal structures, projects, and systems. Press TV has reported that Brazil and Iran are among the latest countries to begin negotiating trade deals that exclude the US dollar. However, if the Western narrative is true that China's economy is imploding and that it is allegedly so bad, it is no surprise, therefore, that the Western media would ignore how China is rapidly expanding the rebirth of the historic Silk Road trading route. This past week, Press TV reported that the first Silk Road train from China arrived in Tehran via Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan in a record time of 14 days. This marks the opening of the next phase of the Silk Road trading network, one of many phases that the project plans for boosting trade across Eurasia. Sputnik News reported on January 21st that China plans to boost its Silk Road project spending between the years of 2016 to 2020. This hardly sounds like a country whose economy is in the midst of collapse. If it helps one to understand the logic, perhaps this might help. If someone has a loan for $10,000 and wins a lottery prize of $10,000, some people will use the real money to pay off a debt that was never real. Thus, the real value has now been lost, and the winners are still left with nothing extra, although some may feel grateful to be free of the debt. What countries are apparently discovering is that it is not good business to use good money to pay off bad debts. Countries like China and Russia are investing in projects that provide a real return on value instead of making criminal bankers in the Western countries richer so that these criminal bankers can continue to push their hegemonic policies upon them. Use real financial resources to create real projects and real returns instead of supporting criminals, is what it comes down to. Keep the money within the family of allies also. The BRICS Post reported on February 15th, as India assumes its role of the rotating presidency of the alliance, that despite the current difficulties of BRICS economies, their economic fundamentals remain unchanged and better cooperation will help them tackle global challenges. This according to Chinese Vice Finance Minister Zhu Guangyao. Leaders of the BRICS emerging nations said during last year's annual summit they were worried about the volatility of global financial markets and oil prices and agreed to coordinate efforts to keep their economies stable. Whereas the U.S. prefers to dominate on its own, China is encouraging the alliance of countries to stick together and weather the storm of the collapsing fiat currency system and the collapsing of U.S. hegemony worldwide. The BRICS appear to be more than strong enough to weather the storm. The article writes that, in addition, better economic, financial, cultural, and political cooperation will promote the integrated development of the countries. The bloc's largest initiatives to date, a $100 billion development bank and a $100 billion currency pool, are now operational. The BRICS combined GDP grew 300% in the last decade, as opposed to only 60% growth registered by the developed world. Many have heard the expression that loosely states the following: don't try to fix a broken system, but rather create a new system that makes the old one obsolete. That is the process that the world is now going through, much to the fear of those desperately trying to preserve the broken system. There's also something else beginning to happen around the world in terms of a discussion that, until now, has been kept from the people. Sometime last year, CVN reported on a small town in the Canadian province of Manitoba that experimented with providing a basic income for the inhabitants of the town. The project was a success by all measures, and yet it wasn't implemented on a national level. It was a success that those in power did not want shared with the general population. CVN has also reported that several cities in the Netherlands, Finland as a country, Switzerland as a country, and several other countries have begun exploring the possibility of offering a basic income to all. The discussion, it appears, is now coming back to Canada, and also it's taking place in Namibia, in Africa. The Daily Guide Africa.com website reported on February 4th that the Basic Income Grant, an initiative aimed at eradicating poverty in Namibia by the year 2025, will soon be tabled in Cabinet for discussion and approval. This is according to the Minister of Poverty Eradication and Social Welfare, Zephania Kamita, who made the remarks during a 5-day post-election seminar for members of Parliament on Thursday. Kamita said a blueprint that will foster the implementation of the Basic Income Grant and various policies aimed at addressing poverty will be implemented. The blueprint will lay out wealth redistribution strategies through various taxation modalities, prudent land distribution in both rural and urban areas, as well as skills development and employment creation policies. Kamita also noted that economic growth should be inclusive and not just for the elite and for companies. People must see that the country is growing economically. Unfortunately, there are people in our government who for some reason think government money is their money, and such attitudes and perceptions must change toward a common goal of poverty eradication. In Canada, an article on the Toronto Star website on February the 11th by Sheila Regard and Roderick Benz reports that it has been a breathtaking week for social policy in Canada. The stage is now set for a serious discussion about the merits of a basic income guarantee, and many of the actors have been cast in their leading roles. Jean-Yves Duclos, Federal Minister of Families, Children and Social Development, stated to both CBC Radio and the Globe and Mail last week that a guaranteed minimum income is a policy worthy of discussion once the promised enhancements to child tax benefits occur, an existing kind of minimum income for families with children. At the same time, François Blais, Minister of Employment and Social Solidarity, has taken the spotlight on this issue in Quebec, asked by Premier Philippe Couillard to figure out how the province might turn their existing income support tools in the direction of a basic income guarantee. Blais wrote a book in 2001 called A Basic Income for All. Duclos, a veteran economist, supported basic income in a 2008 paper he wrote for the Institute for Research on Public Policy. It seems that François Blais and perhaps even Duclos needed the years between their original written material and getting into a position of power to put them into their positions of bringing these ideas back to the national table for a discussion. The article adds that in May there will be another resolution and discussion of basic income at the Liberal Party's National Convention in Winnipeg. Further evidence, the stage is now set for an adult conversation on basic income. One may argue, however, that given the rate of current financial shifting, other significant events may be unfolding, contributing to, among other things, a rebalancing of global currencies through something some sources are calling a global currency reset. What also remains to be seen is what will be done with all the exponential, fraudulent debt that has been created, and whether or not there will be some kind of agreement to write off parts or even all of that fraudulent debt, as the global cabal is increasingly removed from its power over humanity and the planet. Regardless of what some may try to say, it is hard to argue the synchronicity of so many events, so many initiatives, and so many discussions worldwide, such as the one about basic income, all of this supposedly, quote-unquote, suddenly, taking place around the world, without something having changed in the geopolitical structure to allow these things to take place. Exactly what those things are, however, we'll have to wait for a future moment of now as they become known to all. In general news, we take a look this week at yet another slam dunk speech given in the U.S. Senate by Elizabeth Warren. Warren is the senior U.S. Democratic senator from Massachusetts, and she has gained notoriety for her aggressive style in examining what has been going on in the banking sector in the U.S. She is also a potential rumored vice presidential candidate to Bernie Sanders. This time, Warren takes on the criminally fraudulent judicial system, and, like many of her other speeches, it's no holds barred. She doesn't hold back.
Equal justice under law. That's supposed to be the basic premise of our legal system, that our laws are just, and that everyone, no matter how rich or how powerful or how well connected, will be held equally accountable if they break those laws. But that's not the America we live in. It's not equal justice when a kid gets thrown in jail for stealing a car, while a CEO gets a huge raise when his company steals billions. It's not equal justice when someone hooked on opioids gets locked up for buying pills on the street, but bank executives get off scot-free for laundering nearly $1 billion of drug cartel money. We have one set of law in the books, but there are really two legal systems. One legal system is for big corporations, for the wealthy and the powerful. In this legal system, government officials fret about unintended consequences if they're too tough. In this legal system, instead of demanding actual punishment for breaking the law, the government regularly accepts token fines and phony promises to do better next time. In this legal system, even after huge companies plead guilty to felonies, law enforcement officials are so timid that they don't even bring charges against individuals who work there. That's one system. The second system is for everyone else. In this second system, whoever breaks the law can be held accountable. Government enforcement isn't timid here. It's aggressive. Consequences be damned. Just ask the families of Sandra Bland, Freddie Gray, and Michael Brown about how aggressive they are. In this legal system, the government locks up people for decades, ruining lives over minor drug crimes, because that's what the law demands. Yes, there are two legal systems, one for the rich and powerful, and one for everyone else. The American people know that we have two legal systems, but they expect us to fix it. They expect us to stand for justice. They expect us to once again honor the simple notion that in America, nobody is above the law. And anyone in Congress who thinks they can simply talk tough on crime and then vote to make it harder to crack down on corporate criminals, hear this. I promise you, the American people are watching, and they will remember.
A story on the speech was also done by Zach Carter of the Huffington Post on February 3rd, and the link is in the show summary for the story. While Warren takes on the U.S. judicial system, over in the EU Parliament in Strasbourg in France, Nigel Farage, leader of the UK Independence Party, or UKIP, is taking on the issue of an upcoming UK referendum on whether or not the UK should join the EU. Like Warren, Farage does not appear to hold back, calling out a so-called deal to be presented to the UK people. Farage is clear about people power, not only in the UK, but also around the world.
Well, it wasn't supposed to be like this, was it? Because Mr. Cameron's renegotiation began with really big intentions. Treaty change. He was going to control the free movement of people. He was going to achieve a fundamental change, not just in Britain's relationship with the European Union, but reform the EU itself. And what we got was a letter from Mr. Tusk, in which there's no treaty change, no powers returned to the United Kingdom, and no control over our borders at all. In fact, it was hardly worth the wait. It's really rather pathetic. But there is, of course, one more chance for the Prime Minister, because he goes to the European Summit in a couple of weeks' time. And like Oliver Twist, he will parade in front of the other leaders and say, please can we have some more concessions? I find it rather humiliating that a British Prime Minister has to do this, but I'm certain of one thing: he won't get another thing. Because just look at the substance of this. We have an emergency brake on migrant benefits. Wow! It was supposed to be a total ban on migrant benefits for up to 4 years. So it is hardly an emergency brake, it's more of a handbrake turn. And the Prime Minister is saying we've got a red card. Isn't that wonderful? Well, what that means is, if a majority of parliaments in the European Union can say to Mr Juncker they don't want one of his directives, is that a cause for celebration? I mean, if 15 parliaments couldn't stop a piece of law, we'd be living in a communist dictatorship. And what I've gone through here are the good bits. But the most bizarre thing is Mr Cameron said with this deal he would now vote for Britain to join the European Union. So let's have a little think about that. If the question in June was should we join the European Union, we'd have to tell the British people you must surrender the control and sovereignty of your parliament and have 75% of your laws made somewhere else. Your Supreme Court will not be supreme. You will be overruled by a court in Luxembourg made up of people who aren't even judges. You will have to give up your fishing grounds, including, in some places, 200 miles of the North Sea, and you must cut your links with the Commonwealth and the wider world because you're no longer fit to negotiate your own global trade deals. Oh, and by the way, for all of this, you'll be paying £55 million a day as a membership fee. Would the British people vote for that? Not a snowball's chance in Hades. And all we have to do is recognise that whilst the politicians and the big banks and the big businesses will in this referendum defend their own vested self-interests, it's people power that will win this referendum, and after we've won this referendum, I hope in many other countries in Europe too.
That speech given by Farage occurred a couple of weeks ago, and the summit referred to by Farage occurred on the 18th and 19th of February this week. Catherine Hardy, writing for Euronews, reported on February 16th that this meeting is significant because it is chaired by European Council President Donald Tusk, and that leaders from all 28 member states will be in attendance. For listeners who are unfamiliar, the European Council is the true power body in the European Union, run by unelected officials that overrides the European Parliament. The EU Parliament, as it has been argued, is merely a symbolic waste of taxpayer money to give the people the illusion that their voice has power in the EU. A Euronews article on February 18th quoted Farage as saying that a Brexit, meaning a British exit from the EU, would be a certainty if an EU deal fails to be agreed upon. On the agenda at this meeting will be primarily the refugee crisis and the negotiating of a new deal to entice the UK to stay in the EU ahead of a UK referendum scheduled for June 23rd to decide that question. In the latest update on the story before news time on February 19th, Euronews was reporting that a few potentially critical issues have arisen and leaders have been asked to stay another night. French President François Hollande was quoted in the article as saying that there is the will to have a financial regulation which can be applied to all financial capitals of Europe, and there is no right to veto. Essentially, what the power-hungry European Commission is seeking to do is be allowed to exert its unelected authority to continue to control everything relating to finances of its member nations without the possibility of a veto. For those who are following the financial details in the world at this time, as we heard in the financial news moments ago, events such as negative interest rates and the collapse of the stock markets and bank bail-ins and bank bailouts are predominantly the things that the European Union, or the European Commission rather, could potentially control. As more Europeans continue to wake up, they are seeing what has happened in countries like Greece and Ukraine and others, and as the momentum builds from country to country, people will continue to question the purpose of the actions of the unelected officials at the highest levels of the EU, and also begin to wonder about the fearful strategies of false flag refugee crises that are designed to destabilize European countries, so people will fall back into fear and choose to stay under the protection of the EU and of NATO, two institutions that appear to be breaking up more than they are uniting. There are many who, no doubt, are wondering what the heck is happening to our world at this time. There are those who are beginning to have an understanding of what is going on. Some of those people are able to explain it better than others without creating energies of fear. Hollywood has been notorious for using the entertainment industry to brainwash people. They have also used the industry to mock humanity by putting out all their plans and intentions in the form of entertainment right in plain sight to allow humanity to digest and accept the slavery that has been imposed upon them. At times, however, there have also been elements of truth that have been snuck in, also for people to read between the lines and digest. A lot is changing, and it is unclear exactly what is going on, especially in the entertainment industry, as examples of positive change are beginning to filter out to the general public in the form of music, film, and TV programming. A video clip of a scene from a movie released last year entitled Tomorrowland, starring George Clooney, Hugh Laurie, and Britt Robertson, crossed my path recently, and although I have not yet seen the movie, I am now deciding that I would like to see it to see exactly what this is all about. One particular clip delivers a meaningful description of the mind programming that has gone on with humanity and how humans perceive the end of the world.
Let's imagine, if you glimpsed the future, were frightened by what you saw, what would you do with that information? You would go to politicians, captains of industry, and how would you convince them? Data, facts. Good luck. The only facts they won't challenge are the ones that keep the wheels greased and the dollars rolling in. But what if there was a way of skipping the middleman, putting the critical news directly into everyone's head? The probability of widespread annihilation kept going up. The only way to stop it was to show it, to scare people straight. Because what reasonable human being wouldn't be galvanized by the potential destruction of everything they've ever known or loved? To save civilization, I would show its collapse. But how do you think this vision was received? How do you think people responded to the prospect of imminent doom? They gobbled it up like a chocolate eclair. They didn't fear their demise, they repackaged it. It can be enjoyed as video games, as TV shows, books, movies. The entire world wholeheartedly embraced the apocalypse and sprinted towards it with gleeful abandon. Meanwhile, your Earth was crumbling all around you. You've got simultaneous epidemics of obesity and starvation. Explain that one. Bees and butterflies start to disappear. The glaciers melt. Algae blooms all around you. The coal mine canaries are dropping dead, and you won't take the hint. In every moment, there is the possibility of a better future, but you people won't believe it. And because you won't believe it, you won't do what is necessary to make it a reality. So you dwell on this terrible future, you resign yourselves to it. For one reason, because that future doesn't ask anything of you today. So, yes, you saw the iceberg, you warned the Titanic. But you will just steer for it anyway, full steam ahead. Why? Because you want to sink.
The scene takes on some greater significance as one begins to consider how U.S. Republican candidate Donald Trump seems to connect to so many people who are still asleep with some of his negative comments about races, gender, cultures, classes, and so forth. To be fair, as I have not seen the movie yet, I am unable to say with certainty if this better world being advocated in this scene is a world under the control of the global cabal or a world under control of humanity, perhaps with some help from our benevolent galactic families or travelers from the future, as the video clip seems to suggest. Regardless, however, it does come down to a choice that each human is resolved to make to create the end goal, or the better world one is claiming to want to experience. However, despite all this negative programming, something else is still happening in the world. Many are still waking up, and many are becoming empowered, and many are choosing to serve humanity and the planet despite the risks in doing so. Despite attempts by the global cabal, there are many great things happening for those who have the open hearts, minds, and eyes to look for them. An article by Philip J. Watt, appearing on the Mind Unleashed website on February 7th, shares the following good news. The control matrix is crashing because the truth seekers are winning. The article starts out by identifying what has been currently taking place on our world. Later, Watt writes, as we begin what we call the 21st century, every system that should be designed to facilitate the health and vitality of the people has been hacked with lies, deception, dysfunction, and disharmony. It's easy to think that this is an embarrassment for our species because it's beneath our intelligence and ethical capacity. Yet, there's no need to lose faith in the inevitable betterment of humanity, including the way in which we organize and economize our societies. Why? Because all of this dysfunction has been an effective driver of the collective awakening that is rising in the hearts and minds of humanity. This is almost the same thing we heard in the clip from Tomorrowland. The author continues, the inspiring fact is that more and more people are slowly waking up and realizing we all have the opportunity to come to our own informed opinion on the truth pertaining to both the spiritual and systemic realities. So many more people now understand the mainstream news is not to be taken seriously, as it's not where we can find information which is aligned with the deeper truths. They're also acknowledging that we have the choice on what we decide to personally stand and fight for, as well as the legacy we leave for our children and our future generations. As well, Watt points out the following. There are many beautiful souls who are leading the charge by attempting to redesign our society back into alignment with the natural laws of our universe. We should be one of them, regardless of which way we personally decide to contribute. To do that, we all need to be super clear within ourselves what we believe and what we want to change. There are many ways to do it, too, so finding our passions and strengths is critical to playing our own small part in the shift. It is simply no longer acceptable to keep our heads in the sand. Either we're a minion of the system or we are not. Of course, it's difficult to completely disconnect from the way resources flow through the control channels, yet that needn't stop us from talking about it, sharing information online, and somehow contributing, no matter how small, to local and global movements which aim to transform humanity into the new paradigm of abundance. Most people are good people, Watt continues, yet the masses have been brainwashed into thinking in ways that are absolutely nowhere near aligned to the truth. They might be sleepwalking through a time where the tipping point for the conscious society builds, but that doesn't mean that they're not salvageable. Watt concludes with the following. We all have a responsibility to help facilitate waking up the collective so that together we are more empowered and informed to really bring about a future of justice and honor that we can all be proud of. To do so, let me give you some advice. Watt says, don't get frustrated, don't be rude, don't belittle, don't condemn. We all had to wake up at one stage, so it's hypocritical if we are. Instead, be calm, be cool, be real, be articulate. If we want to be successful in helping others to face the delusions, then we need to ensure their defense mechanisms aren't raised, so they're more likely to be open and receptive to embrace the truth. In tonight's final words, I'll comment a bit more on the people who are ready and willing to answer this call for humanity and our planet at this time. In disclosure-related news, CVN recently reported on one whistleblower who has recently come forward, sharing his involvement in the design and construction of anti-gravitational ships for use in space by the U.S. Navy as part of one of several deep space programs. In that article, dated January 26th, appearing on the exopolitics.org website, William Tompkins supports his claims with numerous documents, including 2 designs he completed for space battle cruisers and space carriers that would decades later become the backbone of the U.S. Navy space battle groups. Apparently, another whistleblower, it seems, is getting ready to come forth with more information. At least several years ago, I mentioned that as a few whistleblowers came forward, some might get punished, but others would begin to gain some celebrity status, and witnessing this would eventually begin to bring more and more whistleblowers forth once they see that others are doing the same thing. What happens to each whistleblower, whether it be punishment or fame, seems to depend upon the sole contract of the individual and what message the individual has chosen to bring forth for humanity at this time. In an article by John Austin on February 16th in the London Express, Austin writes the following: a former U.S. naval officer who claims his secrecy agreement with the American government has expired is vowing to lift the lid on thousands of top-secret UFO files he claims to have seen. The Express article focuses primarily on a UK UFO event which occurred in Rendlesham Forest in 1980. That incident has come to be known as the UK version of the Roswell incident in the US. The article goes on to add that the man, who says he was a third-class petty officer at the Naval Telecommunications Center within NAS Moffett Field from February 1986 to October 1989, also claims he can shed light on the mysterious mass UFO sighting involving military personnel in 1980. He has yet to be named, but a former British Ministry of Defence UFO investigator confirmed to London Express, that the man is a genuine source, creating a flurry of excitement within the UFO disclosure community. One prominent UFO advocate who worked within the UK Ministry of Defence, Nick Pope, believes the whistleblower to be legitimate based on the language he has used in his communications. Although Pope still has an oath of secrecy, he has come out as having said that he has a strong interest in the information that allegedly will be shared. A different article on the story, appearing on the exopolitics.org website on February 17th, Michael Sala adds the following information. Regarding the yet-to-be-disclosed documents awaiting release by the new whistleblower, it will be important to evaluate these documents in terms of how accurately they detail the U.S. Navy's involvement in extraterrestrial and UFO-related projects. This will be seminal when it comes to revelations concerning the existence of secret space programs that Corey Goode and other whistleblowers have previously disclosed, which are investigated in Sala's book entitled Insiders Reveal Secret Space Programs and Extraterrestrial Life. Tompkins' testimony, as discussed in a series of articles, provides an important basis for evaluating the new whistleblower's claims and documents. This will help determine whether the new whistleblower's testimony is part of a partial disclosure plan intended to cover up crimes in space, or a genuine disclosure initiative designed to acclimate the general public to what lies ahead. As to whether Tompkins' testimony itself is part of a full or partial disclosure plan, it's important to point out that Tompkins received the go-ahead to begin writing his autobiography in 2001 by Admiral Hugh Webster, a former corporate director of the U.S. Navy League. In 2009, Tompkins began collaborating with Dr. Robert Wood, a retired 43-year veteran with McDonnell Douglas, who was so impressed by Tompkins' information and documents that he eventually became the book's editor. Selected by Extraterrestrials was only released in December of 2015, but its 14-year gestation means that it long predates elite negotiations over full and partial disclosure, some of which Corey Goode, claims to have attended beginning in March of 2015. The 2001 approval by Admiral Webster suggests that Tompkins' revelations are part of a U.S. Navy-sanctioned disclosure plan that has been in place for some time, but is now moving into high gear. Goode was quoted in the article as having said that, "I was told heavily credentialed people who have worked in the lower military intelligence secret space program are being prepped and coached to be whistleblowers and provide the public with the truth. This same group had a direct message sent to me that I should back off the full disclosure narrative as it is irresponsible to the public." Goode was also quoted as saying that a full disclosure event would consist of a major data dump on the internet with many hundreds of thousands of documents, audio and video files on multiple mirrored sites for everyone to have access to. There would be a collapse of the corporate media machine, and a 24/7 television and radio education campaign would be initiated. Not all channels and stations would be co-opted, so people are not overwhelmed and could tune out as they needed due to the stress. Sala added in the article the following: "As originally envisaged, the document dumps would reveal all the truth about secret space programs and extraterrestrial alliances, and this would lead to war crimes trials and major global changes. A catalyzing event, such as global economic collapse, was argued by a secret space program alliance to be necessary for the document dumps plan to move forward." In a previous article published on January 1st, I wrote about recent meetings by elite groups which indicated that negotiations were secretly underway to prevent the catalyzing event from occurring. Now, this is Michael Sala still writing. He continues, "A catalyzing event such as economic collapse, as Goode was told, could be prevented by a new financial system being put in place to reform the current financial system. Thus, China and other BRICS nations could come forward to rescue the tottering international financial system in exchange for a variety of benefits." This has led to Goode's current report that a decision has been made by an alliance of global elites and secret space program groups that the massive document dumps will not be going ahead after all. A more limited disclosure plan has been agreed upon, which will spread out the document releases over an extended period to allow the public to better acclimate to the disturbing information they contain. Everything that is happening now is profoundly interconnected, and this cannot be understated. Many individuals are working to bring knowledge and truth, as they perceive it to be, to the general public. This is part of the bigger picture, but many are still not offering the perspective of the bigger picture, and it is this part of the puzzle that is harder to grasp for most, for they do not yet fully understand the higher cosmic or spiritual purpose for all that is happening, why it is happening, and particularly why is it happening now and what is contributing to it. Finally, in health news, no doubt there are many in the listening audience who would love to regrow a full set of teeth. Until now, humans have been conditioned to believe that this simply is not possible, and yet research is beginning to show that apparently this is not the case. An article on RT on February 15th looks at some of the similarities between humans and sharks. Sharks, as many people know, are able to regenerate their sets of teeth. The article writes the following: "Through analyzing cat shark embryos, the scientists found that the dental lamina cells are active in the initial emergence of sharks' teeth and are redeployed for further tooth regeneration. Although it may seem like a unique and impressive ability, the researchers have found that humans actually possess the same set of cells. However, humans currently only experience 2 sets of teeth being formed in their lifetime, the baby teeth, and the adult teeth. The article adds that, according to scientists, the tooth-making genes found in sharks have been conserved through 450 years of evolution and probably made the first vertebrate teeth. However, the ability in humans has been dramatically reduced over time. The finding represents a significant achievement for the researchers, as the genetic mechanisms that allow sharks to regenerate their teeth have previously been poorly understood. The new discovery could pave the way for the development of therapies for human tooth loss, according to Dr. Gareth Fraser from the university's Department of Animal and Plant Sciences at Sheffield University in England. Although the article hints that this kind of technology is still several years away, I and many listeners no doubt share the belief that this knowledge is already available and is beginning to work its way through the mainstream consciousness. One way that is reported to be helpful in regenerating tooth enamel is to take calcium and magnesium. Magnesium is reported to help facilitate the absorption of the calcium into the body. One of the better sources of calcium, without relying on pharmaceutical pills, is to boil your unused egg shells and grind them into a powder, which can be added to smoothies or taken directly. If you happen to be one who wants to get back into shape, but hate the idea of going to a gym, and perhaps lack the motivation to exercise at home, perhaps a pool is something that may appeal to you. Despite what many people may think, swimming is actually one of the better workouts for the body, partly because the water eliminates stresses on the body due to impact exercises such as with running, but also because it creates in the mind the feeling that one is not working as hard, even though the body is actually doing so. An article appearing on the Mercola.com website on February 19th writes the following: "You might think you could not possibly get as intense of a workout in water, but research suggests otherwise. Due to the resistance of the water, it just seems like you can't work as hard, but in reality, you are. The water acts as a form of built-in resistance, as if you've surrounded your body with weights, making it simple to increase the intensity of your workout and challenge muscles that are harder to engage on land. Also, because water lessens the effects of gravity, you are able to move your body through a wider range of motion, which improves flexibility. Even your lungs get a beneficial workout because the water pressure makes them work harder than they would on land. Because it's low impact and easily tailored to your fitness level, anyone can benefit from water exercise regardless of age or agility. The benefits of swimming are even greater for those who have specific physical challenges." The article continues, "If you're overweight or obese, elderly, have arthritis, joint pain, osteoporosis, or an injury that makes weight-bearing exercise difficult or painful, water may be an excellent choice. Swimming or walking in water reduces the pressure on your back and knees." This, according to Kathy Stevens of the website WebMD. To appreciate why water training works so well, you need to understand water's unique properties. In water, you have almost no gravity. You're relieved of 90% of your body weight, so you become buoyant. This frees you to move in new ways. Exercising in water builds cardiovascular stamina, strength, and flexibility, helps burn body fat, increases circulation, and can help you rehabilitate healing muscles and joints. Research shows that people who exercise can burn as much body fat and build as much muscle as those who engage in land-based exercise programs. I personally now prefer to do my exercise routine in the water. During the winter season, I am now using a pool at a gym club, and this means that there are certain hazards that come with swimming pools, and chlorine is one of the biggest. Wherever possible, swimming in fresh water or salt water is ideal. If you have your own pool, you may consider getting saline water or cleaning the pool with a hydrogen peroxide solution instead of chlorine. One doesn't need to have an Olympic-sized pool to get a great workout. Most of my exercises, for example, can be done in a small space of 2 to 3 square meters. As much as I personally dislike the idea of being in a chlorine pool, it is the only way, at least for now, to get the kind of exercising I enjoy at this time. In this week's final words, a number of weeks ago in this newscast, perhaps even a few months ago now, I covered a story on the newscast relating to 7 signs that one may be a rainbow warrior. In the article, an indigenous human by the name of Crazy Horse was quoted as saying that, "Upon suffering beyond suffering, the red nation shall rise again, and it shall be a blessing for a sick world. I see a time of 7 generations when all the colors of mankind or humankind will gather under the sacred tree of life, and the whole earth will become one circle again." Over the last few broadcasts, listeners have been starting to receive samples of how this indigenous wisdom is beginning to be brought back into the mainstream consciousness in various ways to help all humans. The article added the following: "The heart is greater than money, but it is also greater than patriotism, nationalism, and dogma combined. The human heart is greater than any perceived color. It is all colors and none. When birds fall from the sky and the animals are dying, says the Hopi prophecy, a new tribe of people shall come unto the earth from many colors, classes, and creeds, and who by their actions and deeds shall make the earth green again. They will be known as the warriors of the rainbow." It is perhaps not exactly appropriate to use the particular label rainbow warrior, because labels still have a tendency, at least in the human mind, to create separation. And this separation may be interpreted as positive in terms of separating from interests aligned to the global cabal and Zionism, or it may be interpreted as negative, such as societal labels of ADD or ADHD or autistic. Each human possessing his or her uniquely different and equally beautiful qualities has his or her unique service to humanity and to all life. Many humans are claiming to want a similar end goal, this being of global peace, health, freedom, and abundance for all within this birthing galactic star nation. But how each individual arrives at this end goal will be unique to her or to him, and it is not up to anyone else to determine how one is or is not to achieve the end goal. However, for the purposes of this article, the 7 criteria for review are as follows. Number 1. You are ecocentric as opposed to egocentric. You are eco-moral and soul-centric. Your sense of right and wrong goes beyond the myopic and parochial perspective of good and evil and is based firmly in your understanding of healthy and unhealthy. Having individuated your ego, you are holistically conscious and compassionate. You are determined to use eco-centric strategies in order to bring balance to an egocentric world. Number 2, you are a spiritual chameleon par excellence. You are the personification of a spiritual reconnect between nature and the human soul. You practice a kind of new syncretism, a mixing, matching, and borrowing of elements from a variety of spiritual and philosophical traditions to create a personalized path that works in accord with the greater cosmos. For you, the natural world is a realm of the spiritual and the sacred. Indeed, the natural is the spiritual. Number 3, you blur the lines drawn between nations and cultures. You do not limit yourself to one tiny corner of the world. You are a global citizen, a cosmopolitan par excellence. Borders cannot contain you. Cages cannot imprison you. The world is your sovereign country, and you do not limit yourself to the close-minded pettiness of nationalism. Number 4, you count coup on tyranny. This is a term that may be hard for non-English listeners to grasp. It basically means something like this. You are an unapologetic eco-warrior. You are willing to break the outdated taboos of rigid systems of human governance. especially when they are unhealthy and immoral and don't work for human beings. You stand up and speak out on any and all unhealthy, unsustainable systems of human governance, and you are doing this often. Number 5, you plant seeds of sustainability in an unsustainable world. Your hands are dirty from digging up corrupt seeds and replacing them with seeds that have the potential to flourish. Your hands are bloody from pulling unsustainable swords out of unhealed wounds. You are the personification of moderation, walking the path of the middle way and the golden mean, and using the golden ratio to balance all things. You agree with Alan Turing's ecological equivalent to the golden rule. Each generation should meet its needs without jeopardizing the prospects for future generations to meet their own needs. Number 6, you are an infinite player, and this means that while other people are playing finite games that indirectly and directly destroy the world, you are busy playing the infinite game of life for the sake of healing the world in order to continue play. While the world is busy falling apart, you are busy putting things back together again. You've made a sacred game out of it, connecting like minds, disconnecting unhealthy minds, and reconnecting cosmic mind. And number 7, you are the 5th horseman of the apocalypse, meaning that you have taken it upon yourself to clean up the unsustainable mess of the previous 4 horsemen: conquest, war, famine, and death. As Providence, the 5th horseman of the apocalypse, you are standing your ground and reclaiming agency in the face of a terrifying ecocidal mania. You are connecting the cultural, moral, and ecological dots necessary in order to get people to a point where they don't have to cannibalize our only Earth. In that article, Brooke Medicine Eagle was quoted as saying that we have the opportunity to build a rainbow bridge into the golden age, but to do this, we must do it together with all the colors of the rainbow, with all the peoples, all the beings of the world. We who are alive on Earth today are the rainbow warriors who face the challenge of building this bridge. How refreshing it was to hear Maria Zakharova, in her official capacity as spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry, to even acknowledge the Mayan prophecy and the shift in consciousness that began to accelerate at the end of 2012. How appropriate also that she identified that these events taking place on Earth right now are not limited to just one country or one continent. It is happening worldwide. As well, it is happening worldwide, and it is happening within each and every human being. Even more so than this, however, it is happening worldwide, within each human, and it is happening beyond our planet, within our solar system. It was perhaps unfortunate that Ms. Zakharova said things like, "Things are getting worse," in the full interview. I would like to believe that this is not exactly what she meant. The fact that she even mentioned the Mayan prophecy suggests that she has paid attention to at least some of the messages speaking of great changes and shifts at this time. And all people awakening to this shift will understand that although things may appear to be getting worse on one level or several levels, it is merely a cleansing of all the negative energies that must first come up to the surface in order to be acknowledged, resolved, released, and then healed. People are awakening worldwide, and they are beginning to stand up and speak out on individual levels. Although most of those individuals will have no idea the event that they are speaking out on is very intricately and profoundly connected to numerous other geopolitical and geoeconomic events happening at this time. Humanity is slowly beginning to grasp this great complexity, and it can indeed be overwhelming to one who has just begun his or her journey of awakening at this time. It is up to the Rainbow Warriors to serve with compassion, patience, forgiveness, and love in striving to serve the souls that have not had the opportunity to digest all that many of us have had years and decades to digest. It is not easy, and trust me when I say this, because I struggle, like everyone else, on a daily basis with the shifting energies within me. Be as gentle and forgiving on yourself also, and this is easier said than done. Again, I know this from personal experience. Look at all we have accomplished up to now. The global cabal appears to be in a high-speed retreat, and the paradigms that once enslaved humanity and encouraged the destruction of our planet for profit, power, and greed are beginning to break down. It is not a time for war. It is a time for doing the final house cleaning that removes all that no longer serves humanity or this planet, so that the higher consciousness seeds can now grow safely, peacefully, healthfully, and abundantly. Create a fantastic week until our next Moment of Now. So that is a sample of the unfolding higher consciousness news around the world this week. Cosmic Vision News is broadcast weekly from the CosmicVisionNews.com website. Links to stories used in this broadcast are published in the show summary on the website blog. CVN can be followed through its Facebook page, Scene page, and YouTube channel, as well as on Twitter, Google+, and LinkedIn. Thank you for sharing your time with me. I'm Jeffrey West, reminding you that hardship often prepares an ordinary person for an extraordinary destiny. Until our next Moment of Now, stay grounded in love, hold the vision of light and peace in your hearts, and keep your eyes to the skies. Disclosure is unfolding all around you. Namaste.